old retirees were talking about naughty acts in a cafe. When they finished, the two retirees paid their bill and leave the cafe. A young man sitting next to them has overheard the conversation and smiles to himself, thinking it would be quite amusing to see two old retirees going at it. He gets up and follows them. Sure enough, he sees the two old retirees near the factory. The little old lady pulls off her panties and lifts up her dress. The old man pulls down his pants and grabs the lady's hips, and the little old lady then reaches for the fence. Well, what follows is 40 minutes of the most athletic the man has ever seen. The little old man is banging away at the little old woman at a pace that only can be described as phenomenal. Limbs are flying everywhere, the movement is a blur, and they do not stop for a single round. Finally, they collapse and don't move for an hour. The man is stunned. Never in his life has he ever seen anything that equates to this. Not in the movies. Not from his friends. Not from his own experiences. Reflecting on what he has just seen, he says to himself, I have to know his secret. If only I could like that now, let alone in 50 years' time. The two old retirees have by this time recovered and dressed themselves. Gathering the courage, he approaches the older man. He says, Sir, in all my life I have never seen anybody like that, particularly at your age. What's your secret? Could you like that 50 years ago? The retiree replies, Son, 50 years ago that fence wasn't electric. A blind man walks into a restaurant and sits down. The waiter, who is also the owner, walks up to the blind man and hands him a menu. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm blind and can't read the menu. Just bring me a dirty fork from a previous customer. I will smell it and order from there. A little confused, the owner walks over to the dirty dish pile and picks up a greasy fork. He returns to the blind man's table and hands it to him. The blind man puts the fork to his nose and takes in a deep breath. Ah, yes, that's what I'll have. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Unbelievable, the owner says to himself as he walks towards the kitchen. The cook happens to be the owner's wife and he tells her what just happened. The blind man eats his meal and leaves. Several days later, the blind man returns and the owner mistakenly brings him a menu again. Sir, remember me? I'm the blind man. I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. I'll go get a dirty fork. The owner again retrieves a dirty fork and brings it to the blind man. After another deep breath, the blind man says, That smells great. I'll take the macaroni and cheese with broccoli. Once again walking away in disbelief, the owner thinks the blind man is screwing around with him and tells his wife that the next time the blind man comes in, he's going to test him. The blind man eats and leaves. He returns the following week. But this time, the owner sees him coming and runs to the kitchen. He tells his wife, Mary, rub this fork on your panties before I take it to the blind man. Mary complies and hands her husband the fork back. As the blind man walks in and sits down, the owner is ready and waiting. Good afternoon, sir. This time I remembered you, and I already have the fork ready for you. The blind man puts the fork to his nose, takes a deep whiff, and says, Hey, I didn't know that Mary worked here. One day, a little girl and a little boy were at the park with their pants pulled down. The little girl asked the little boy, What is that? And the little boy said, I don't know. Then the little boy asked the little girl the same thing and she said she didn't know. So that night, the little girl asked her mom and her mom said, That's your garage. and you must not let any big trucks go in. Meanwhile, at the little boy's house, the little boy asked his dad what it was, and his dad said, "That's your big truck, and you must not park it in any garage." The next day, the boy and the girl pulled their pants down again, but this time the girl went home with blood on her hands. Her mom screamed and asked why she had blood on her hands. The girl said, "The boy tried to put his big truck in my garage, so I pulled his 2 back tires off." In a mental institution, a nurse walks into a room and sees a patient acting like he's driving a car. The nurse asks him, "Charlie, what are you doing?" Charlie replies, "Driving to Chicago." The nurse wishes him a good trip and leaves the room. The next day, the nurse enters Charlie's room just as he stops driving his imaginary car and asks, "Well, Charlie, how you doing?" Charlie says, "I just got into Chicago." "Great," replies the nurse. The nurse leaves Charlie's room and goes across the hall into Bob's room and finds Bob sitting on his bed furiously masturbating. Shocked, she asks, "Bob, what are you doing?" Bob says, "I'm doing Charlie's wife while he's in Chicago."